All right. So, a very good evening, everyone. I hope I'm clearly audible and visible to all of you. I welcome you all to our session today. This session is entirely focused on your GK preparation, your current affairs preparation for different competitive exams, right? So, as we all know, irrespective of what competitive exam you're preparing, whether at the UG level or at the PG level, current affairs play an extremely important role. At the same time, a little bit of a tricky role, right? So a lot of students have this problem that they face towards the strategy that they should follow, or the do's and don'ts, the basic do's and don'ts of preparing for the GK section or the current affairs section. So if I talk about CLAT, as we all know that the exam is supposed to be conducted in December, I mean just 3 months away from the exam. So this session is going to be extremely fruitful and extremely important for you if you're somebody who's aspiring to appear for CLAT exam in December, or for that matter, if you're preparing for any competitive exam, right? So, to make this process easier for us and to make it more convenient and easily understandable for you, we have with us our HitBullsEye GK faculty, Mr. Manish Mittal. And let me give his quick introduction. So, he is gold medalist during his graduation, which he did it from geography honors. Twice went to the interview level, and he's also a national level quizzer. If I talk about his academic, his teaching career, he has more than a decade of experience of teaching, training students for the GK section in the various competitive exams. So, sir, I welcome you to the session. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for that overly generous introduction.
All right. So today we'll be taking up the questions that usually students have when they are preparing for the current affairs section. So the most common question that I have come across that students have is, since current affairs is such an elaborated subject, such a vast subject, dense subject, they always have this fear and anxiety about the preparation. So what would be your suggestion to such aspirants? How should they go about with the preparation?
First of all, I would like to straight away, annihilate the misconception that GK is very vast, that it is very unpredictable. It may have certain element of unpredictability. It may be very vast, but let us not forget the fact that I am assuming here, like before answering, I'm presuming that most of us are matriculate students. We have, of course, done our 10th standard. And we have covered all these subjects up to a certain respectable level till the 10th standard already, whether it is social studies like history, geography, economics, or civics, or whether it is the general science subjects. In fact, up to a certain standard, let's say our 7th or 8th standard, we even have GK as a separate subject to cover all those tidbits and those factual points. So G level exams, and in fact a bit more than that, we have already covered till the 10th standard. So if a student begins with this mindset, I think it would be really good. So that takes away most of the fear, most of the anxiety. The problem lies in, missing the touch. Because if you are starting preparing for an exam, like in 12th standard, you have already missed the touch from GK for the last 1 or 1.5 years. That is what creates a problem, and that's what needs to be tackled. Because earlier, when the focus used to be on static GK, they could ask just anything under the sun. But thankfully, now that is no longer the situation. And the exam has become predictable. I don't agree with the point that many people, with the viewpoint that many people have, that the exam has become unpredictable. I think it has become more predictable only if you know where to look. And that, of course, will help in that.
Right. Very true, sir. So, as I mentioned earlier, that we're just 3 months away from CLAT UG 23. So, what, according to you, should be the basic strategy that an aspirant should follow when he or she is preparing for the current affairs section?
For CLAT UG exam, I think, and this stands true for any other exam as well, the first thing you need to do is you need to have a good look at the syllabus that the testing agency has provided. In this case, I think this is the Consortium of National Law Universities. So the syllabus that the CLAT pattern changed a few years back. So I would say the last 3 CLAT question papers should be a good starting ground for you to narrow down on the kind of questions that are being asked. So first is syllabus, second is the previous year question papers. This should give you a good idea of the kind of news and the kind of preparation you're going to have.
Right, right. Very well said, sir. So, in the previous session that we had for BBKP UG, we had with us our legal faculty, and she mentioned the importance of current affairs when you're preparing for the CLAT exam. So, my next question is, what are the common hurdles that students usually face when they are preparing for the current affairs section for CLAT?
The most common hurdle that I have seen students facing is that they keep on preparing, but the score in the mock tests and the score in other tests doesn't seem to increase.
Right.
Now that is a very common problem, and I think the way to address it is that you should be focused on the type of topics that you know are going to be asked. It is when you start reading just anything that creates a problem. And please let us not forget that we are in the information over, we're in the age of information overflow. There is a lot of information, there is a lot of unsolicited, and there is a lot of unwanted information doing the rounds on the internet. And the real challenge is not to read a lot. The real challenge is how to limit the material that we are going to read. And due to that problem, students just keep reading anything that there is. So to solve that problem, you need to be focused on exam specific preparation. So you need to filter whenever you read a particular news, let's say. So now current affairs is, prevalent everywhere. I mean, it's available. What you need to do is, if you have a good command over the syllabus, and if you have a good command over the previous year question papers and the trend that is coming in, it would set a good filter in your mind to narrow down on the most important topics. So first thing I would suggest you is that. Second common hurdle that students face is they are not able to inculcate reading habit in their daily lives. For that, I would suggest, and this might be an unpopular opinion, that please try to go for the hard copy of a newspaper if you're reading it. Because when we tend to read on screen, we tend to be distracted. We start searching for a particular thing on Google, and one thing leads to another. And before you know it, an hour is gone, or maybe half an hour is gone. So I would suggest you that if you are trying to inculcate reading as a habit, at least for the initial few weeks, try to do it on a hard copy. Like say you're reading a hard copy newspaper or a monthly magazine. So that way your distraction will be reduced and you will start focusing more. These are, I think, 2 or 3 hurdles that students are facing, and these are the ways of how to tackle them.
You mentioned that about the density of material that one has, the access that one has to ample of material through which he or she can prepare for the current affairs section. So on that only, I have my next question. What topics should the students expect in the current affairs section for this year's, for December's CLAT exam? What topic should one expect?
If we look at the previous few years' question papers, we have seen an overwhelming majority of international relations being asked in the CLAT exam.
Mm-hmm.
So I think international relations remain one of the top areas from which current affairs should not be missed. It is international relations as well as organizations. And, coincidentally, we are in a time where, for good or bad reasons, a lot of international news are being generated, whether it is the India-China border conflict, India-Nepal border conflict, a lot of new international organizations coming up, or India becoming a member of so many organizations, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So we are seeing an overwhelming flow of international news as well. So that, I think, should be the top priority area. After international relations, equal focus should be played on political news. Now, political news does not mean political statements. It means the news in Indian polity. For example, we have seen topics like the president just got elected, the vice president just got elected. Then we are seeing a lot of news on Supreme Court judgments, which are also relevant from legal reasoning point of view. Then we are seeing, the anti-defection law being invoked in one state or the other. So second, the area that I would, focus on is polity and governance. Then after that, there are all, so many areas on which equal focus should be paid. They can include general science, government schemes and interventions, and environment and ecology. So I think these are the most important areas to focus on.
Right, right. So whenever somebody is preparing for a competitive exam, we generally suggest them that you need to be a smart worker and not a hard worker. So as we know that GK majorly can be categorized as static GK and current GK. So if there's a student who's focusing entirely on current GK and not paying that much of attention to static GK, do you think he or she can qualify the exam by having this approach towards the preparation?
Are we talking specifically about CLAT UG here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think if one is smart, as you said, then it is indeed possible that if one focuses entirely on current affairs and totally skips the static part, still there are chances of making it good in the exam. But there is a rider here. The rider is that whenever current affairs are being prepared, the contextual static knowledge should be covered along with that. So let's say, like yesterday, the news is that the Prime Minister inaugurated Subhash Chandra Bose's statue at India Gate. Now, if you cover this current affair news really well, so you cover the current part. But along with that, you should take a look at Subhash Chandra Bose's static points. Where was Subhash Chandra Bose born? Which political party he founded? Where did he found the Indian National Army? Like all the static part related to Subhash Chandra Bose and all the static part related to the Rajpath or the Kingsway camp in New Delhi. So this way, you are only covering the current affairs, but you're going a bit deeper, a step further, and you're covering the static part of the current affair as well. If you're doing this, then I think you need not cover static GK separately. So here, let's say you have already covered history along with current affairs. So this applies on so many other things as well. Let's say an international organization's meeting just took place. Say the United Nations General Assembly had its meeting. So you cover that meeting and then you read about UN General Assembly in general. How many members are there? In which year it was founded? Who is the president? So if you have this approach, then you are automatically covering static GK along with current. And I think this is a doable approach.
Yeah, that's a very practical approach, or a very nice strategy that anybody can follow on. And it's just a Google search away, right? So whenever you're searching something or you're coming across the news, you can simply just Google search about it and just jot down the important facts about it. And you're preparing the same topic at so many other levels. It's a really nice approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I talk about the GK part, what is the weightage of GK in the CLAT exam?
I think out of a total of 150 odd questions, GK usually gets 35 to 39 questions. So that is almost 1/4 of the total weightage in the exam. And it is, I think this is a low hanging fruit. Like I'm not saying that the others in other subjects the student cannot do well, but why I say this here is because if you do it well, it can save a lot of time in the exam, which cannot be actually said for quantitative aptitude or for those reasoning questions for which you need to put in that time and you need to solve a particular question. In GK, if you are good, it can save a lot of time that can be devoted towards other sections, thereby increasing the overall score. So 1/4 is the weightage, and I think this is one of the most important sections for the exam.
Right, right, right. So whenever anybody wishes to pursue law, and like when I have video counseling going on, so they ask that, ma'am, what is that one particular hobby that we should have if we want to pursue law? So I tell them you need to have a reading habit. Reading is extremely, extremely important if you're somebody who's looking forward to pursue a career in law. So that brings me to my next question. So is passage reading important in GK?
Now, there is no straight answer to this question. Like if I give you a straight answer, that may be misleading. So the straight answer is that no, you do not need to read the passage. This is not like a reading comprehension of verbal subject where the answers can be derived from the passage. It is not so if we talk about the GK section. But then the question is, why do they give that passage? They give that passage to waste the time of those students who do not have any context for that news. So let's say you have not read anything about that news. Now you will be curious. Since you do not know anything, you will read the entire passage just to set that particular context in your mind. But the answer will not be found in the passage. It has never been seen in the last many years since when the new pattern has been adopted that the answer can be found in the passage. That is not the case in GK. So the passage is there just to give you a context. So if you have prepared well enough, you will just read a couple of lines from the passage, or maybe just take a quick glance at the passage, and you will know what they are talking about. Now you can quickly and straight away jump to the questions. In some cases, it may be seen that the questions are carrying, blanks, which need to be covered from the passage. Now, for that, you definitely need to, have a look at only those lines in the passage. And again, unless you have read that news beforehand, you'll not be able to answer that question. So one need not read the passage if one is already aware of that particular news.
Right. Okay, so another common thing that we have in all the competitive exams is they have timings, right? They're supposed to complete a particular section within a particular amount of time, right? So the time management plays a very important role. So a common challenge that students face, especially in the CLAT exam, is that they are not very good at quick reading. They can't read really quickly. They can't scan the passage or the content real quickly. So what are your tips for such students? How can they increase their reading speed?
Well, I think practice makes a man perfect. So the more you read, the better you become at it. But of course, there are two or three tips that I would like to share on how to increase reading speed. So one is, of course, you have to read a lot. That is the most generic advice that you would get from anyone. But there is a very subtle point I would like to highlight, and I don't know, but I haven't, heard it from anyone. But this is my personal experience. That whenever we are new at reading, and we are reading something silently, we are not speaking it from our lips, we are just reading it, then there is a voice that plays in our head.
Introducing Level 6 Pro 5G for free. Feature packed with an HD Plus display and quad camera.
So when I'm reading that sentence, this thing is being played in my brain. I can hear that sound. If you can lower down that voice, and if you can go totally silent, the amount of speed and concentration that you can pick in reading is mind boggling. It's a difficult thing to do, but once you do it, there is no looking back. So try to silence that sound, and this will come with practice. And once you do it, you'll be surprised to see your words per minute increasing amazingly fast. So this thing, I think you should try to do. Try to silence that sound of repeatedly telling you the same words again and again. Silent reading, this is called. One. Second thing is, when you're increasing your speed of reading, there are speed breakers in reading. And those speed breakers can be of two types. One, the vocabulary part. So you are not able to understand a particular word, and you'll just stop at that word and you'll try to make sense of what they're trying to say. So vocabulary is your number one speed breaker. The number two speed breaker can be specific terminologies or jargons that can be used in a specific type of news. Let's say, and since this is CLAT UG discussion, so I can use those type of words also. So let's say there is a particular word from law. Let's say the president prorogued the House of Parliament. Let's say. So if you do not know the meaning of the word prorogue, then you'll be just thinking that what did the president do? What has the president done to the parliament? Has he like blown up the parliament or what? So you'll be like thinking about that word. Now the point is, it's not that there are thousands of such words. There are only a handful of such words, and you will be aware of those words if you are regular with current affairs. Right? Then these words will not pose a challenge for you. There are only, I think, about 80 to 100 words per type of news, and they can be easily covered. So let's say if polity is there, there are 80 to 100 words which are frequently used in polity or law news. And there are a similar set of words that are used in, let's say, international news. So once you're familiar with those words, you will not be bogged down by the speed breakers. And I think if you do these two things, fast reading and a command over the jargons, then reading is a cakewalk.
Right. Very rightly said, sir. I am pretty sure this is the next question that I'm going to ask is something that you must also have come across a lot of time. So, a common question that students have when they're preparing for current affairs is, what should they read? Right? What newspapers should they read, or what magazines should they read? So, do we have any specific material that they can refer to when they're preparing for the exam?
I think, yeah, definitely. So as you said, which newspaper? So first, newspaper is the Bible for anyone preparing for CLAT.
Right.
And this I'm saying not only from point of view of GK, which carries 1/4 of weightage, but if you read newspaper, you're not only improving your GK section, you're also improving your legal reasoning section, you're also improving your verbal section. So just just look at the what you call the time benefit or the cost benefit ratio, the time benefit ratio here. So you're just reading the newspaper, let's say for 1 hour a day, but simultaneously you are preparing for 3 sections of CLAT. I don't think of any other investment of time where you get as much return as you get by reading a newspaper. So newspaper is your Bible. That is number one thing. Now, which newspaper to read? I would recommend Indian Express, I think. The Hindu also can be done, but I do not usually recommend the Hindu for 2 reasons. One, because it is a highly opinionated newspaper. And at CLAT level, I don't think that level of opinion is required. Opinionation is required when one is to write subjective answers.
Right.
But since here only multiple choice questions are involved, so I think the Indian Express better serves that purpose. And within Indian Express also, there is a particular feature called explained feature. So it is the Indian Express explained. So that feature I would recommend, that top thing that if someone can do, so they give like 8 to 10 articles every day, which are mostly in question answer format. So if you are reading that article for the first time, they will have a question and they will themselves answer it.
Okay.
That is a good thing to do. And so in newspapers, I think that. And if you want a compilation of current affairs, then any good monthly magazine would do. And in fact, we have our own in-house magazine, the Bulldoze monthly magazine of current affairs, which specifically has hand-picked topics based on, again, the syllabus and the previous year question papers. So that kind of a monthly magazine is good if you are not into daily notes making.
Right, right. So there's one thing reading something, and there's another thing, absolutely different thing, retaining something, right? Like you're reading something on a regular basis, but then can you memorize it for a very long time is the challenge. So, what, according to you, should be the ways in which students, apart from reading, can retain the data, the information for a longer period of time? Since we know every day we have new current affair, new news, new topics coming up. So should they make notes out of it, or should they watch a video, since video has a larger impact, longer impact rather, on on your mind? So what should they do? How can they go about with the memorization of the news?
Yeah, so that is the biggest challenge, of course, and I think this is the most important question, that the students also ask me. So
Right,
there are 3 things that I would suggest on how to retain a lot of information, because I get that a lot in the classrooms also. That, sir, have you just read this thing before the class? Like, how do you remember that much of information? So there are 3 things that can be done. The first technique is you personalize whatever information is there. Let's say, uh, so let me give you an example. Uh, you know, this example is not from GK, but I'm giving you this my personal example. So once I had this particular interest of increasing my verbal skills. So I took this book of Norman Lewis called Word Power Made Easy. It's a generally recommended book. So there was a chapter in the book in which the personality types were being defined. That this person, let's say this person is uh, cheerful, this person is indefatigable, this person is a blabber. So I read all those words and I wrote their meanings. And I thought that I just now increased my vocab by 50 words. But after a week, when I checked on those notes, I did not remember even a single word out of that. Now, how do I retain that? So I started thinking on how I could personalize all those words. How could I make those my own? That word is in that book. How do I make that word my own? How do I personalize it? So then that idea came to my mind that when I read a particular personality type, an actual person in my life came to my mind. Let's say I read a word indefatigable. So the meaning of indefatigable is that someone who doesn't get fatigued, someone who doesn't get tired, has a lot of energy. That person is called an indefatigable person. Now, when I read that word, a friend of mine came to my mind. His name was Mohit. So I just opened my mobile phone, So in front of his name in my contact list, I saved Indefatigable. Now his name was Indefatigable Mohit. So in the next month or so, I called him a couple of times. He called me a couple of times, and that word got etched into my brain. Then I deleted Indefatigable from his name. And this particular incident is like 7 or 8 years old, and I still remember that word. I didn't have to look for that word again ever. And that way I remember more than 1,000 words, because behind every word there is a story. The same logic can be applied to GK also. Behind every fact, behind every piece of knowledge, there can be a story that is uniquely personal to you. Let's say you want to remember a particular date. Let's say the National Youth Day is celebrated on 12th of January. Now, how do you remember it? Try to think of any person in your life whose birthday or whose anniversary or whose, any particular incident in your life that is even closer to 12th of January, and try to associate youth with that particular incident. You will never forget it. But this is the first technique. You try to personalize something. The second technique is you can make acronyms. You can make acronyms for sets of data. So the weirder the acronym is, the more are the chances that you'll remember it. So let's say I have a lot actually, but I'll try to keep it brief. So let's say you want to memorize all the countries that India borders with. So there are 7 countries that India shares its border with. Now, people have difficulty memorizing the length of border that India shares with all these countries. So for that, there is an acronym called Bachpan MBA. So let's say, I always say this in my class also, कि अगर कभी बचपन में MBA की होती तो आपको पता होता. And they're like, sir, who does MBA in बचपन? So I'm like, बचपन stands for Bangladesh, China, Pakistan, Nepal. And MBA stands for Myanmar, Bhutan, and Afghanistan. And this exactly is the order in which India shares its border with all these countries. So longest with Bangladesh, second with China, and in that order. So this is just one example. And you do it just once and you will never forget it. You'll never forget it. There are a lot of examples. So second thing, you can put an acronym on that particular thing. The third, and I think the most frequently used technique, is you repeat that information enough number of times that it gets solidified. Because whenever we hear or see something for the first time, a new neurological pathway gets formed in our brain. But when you keep repeating that information, that pathway keeps getting stronger and stronger. And the chances of you, reproducing it in the exam are very, very high. So these 3 things, but again, all these 3 require patience. So if you want to just run away from the fact that, okay, this is a fact in front of me, just read it quickly and go to the next one, then it won't happen. You have to stay on that fact. You have to give it time. You have to think about the background and you have to contextualize it. It takes a bit of patience, but I think it is worth it.
I myself am not going to forget Bachpan MBA. it's like a really good trick. I won't forget it. All right. So another important thing. So we get passages in 3 different sections. If I talk about the CLAT exam, we get passages in legal reasoning, we get passages in current affairs, and then of course in English, in verbal ability. So what, according to you, is the difference, the major distinction, the major difference between the passages that you get in the current affairs section, in the English section, and then in the legal reasoning section? What is the major difference?
I think for the comparison purpose, we can put them into 2 different, for comparison purpose, there are 2 different types of passages. So on the one hand, you have legal reasoning and current affairs GK passages. On the second hand, we have the verbal section passages. And why I classify them in this way? Because in verbal section, you need to read the entire passage. You need to know what the author is trying to say, and only then you will be able to answer the questions that follow. So it is like a reading comprehension thing. Unless you read the entire passage with full concentration, you may not be able to answer the questions. On the other hand, in legal reasoning and GK section, you just need to set your context. You just need to get the news which is being asked, and thereafter you may skip the entire passage. Now, this again depends on the passage. So if you do not know anything about that news, you might have to go through it thoroughly. If you know about that news, We just need to skim through it quickly. But the answers to those questions in legal reasoning and in GK, you will not get in the passage. That is for sure. It is not like reading comprehension. So that is, I think, the major difference. But most of the students get frightened at the mere fact that the paper was very lengthy. You do not have to read the passages in legal reasoning and GK. You just have to read those passages in the verbal section. So you need not read the entire paper. I know it is a very lengthy paper, but if you realize that you do not have to read the passages of two of those sections, then I think much of the worry is taken on.
Right, right. So, sir, talking about the exam pattern, if I talk specifically about CLAT UG, so do we have sectional timings and sectional cutoffs for GK, or for that matter, all the sections for the exam? Do we have that?
No, I don't think there is sectional cutoff. You just need to have that overall score in CLAT. There are no sectional cutoffs. And as far as sectional time limit is concerned, when the exam went in an online mode, I think the last year during COVID times, then this could have been a problem. But now, since it is held in a pen and paper mode, there is no sectional cutoff. So you get the entire paper in one go in a hard copy, and you have 2 hours to attempt the paper. So there is no sectional cutoff. And that is why I said that GK is a low hanging fruit, because it does not take time to answer the questions. You know it and you just tick it, and it saves a lot of time. And that time can then be devoted to the other sections that are definitely time consuming, then that require calculations. So since there is no sectional time limit in offline exam, you can definitely save that time from one section, which you can devote to another section. I myself used to do it when I attempted competitive exams. Since I'm not good in quantitative aptitude and reasoning, I used to save all my time from GK and English section. I just used to attempt those two sections really, really quick, and a lot of time was saved. And I used to like calculate really, really slowly, and still I was able to clear so many exams like banking, SSC, etc. So if you're good in one or two sections, that time can be devoted to other sections which you're not really good at.
Right, right. So it's basically the strategy varies from person to person because everybody would have their own different strengths and weaknesses. It is just for you to identify what is your strength, and that would of course take lesser amount of time. And weaknesses, the section that you're weaker in, comparatively weaker in, would take longer amount of time. So that strategy would vary from person to person.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, sir, in my little knowledge, I think we do have negative marking also in the exam, right?
Yes, we do.
For that matter, of course, it will be a foolish thing to attempt 100% question paper when you know that you have negative marking. So, how many questions or what percentage of exam or the section, if I talk about current affairs, should a student appear for or attempt to get a qualifying score?
This is a very dicey question to answer actually, because this answer you get only when you are in the exam hall. So if you go with a preconceived mindset that, let's say I have taken 10 mock tests and in all the mock tests I scored, let's say 25 out of 35 in GK. I'm talking about only this section, let's say. If you go with that preconceived mindset that, okay, this is my bare minimum and I have to score like 25 plus. But suddenly, since exam is highly unpredictable, say suddenly in the exam hall, you find out that you are not able to answer more than 15 questions. This might have a negative impact on your psyche, and it might as well, impact the other sections as well. So in that pressure, if you try to attempt a lot many questions, that might be counterproductive. So if you take, if you do not lose your self-confidence there. Now, this I'm saying, presuming the fact that you have prepared really well throughout the year, and you should be confident enough that if this question is difficult for me, it is difficult for everyone. If you have that confidence in the exam hall, then you will not be very adventurous, and you will attempt a safe paper. Not to say that you attempt only those questions in which you are 100% sure at. Of course, you have to take some educated guesses based on the principle of elimination and all. But you do not go out of the way. Let's say, based on the preconceived notion that I always scored 25 plus, so I have to score here also. That should not be the case. Let's say you do that. Let's say you attempt 30 out of 35 questions, and presuming that, I used to do this in mocks also. And then you come out of the exam hall and you see the reports and you realize that this was one of the toughest exams ever, and cutoff is going to be really, really low, and then you would be regretting. So this decision of how many questions you need to attempt is something you need to take in the exam hall itself. And here, I think the more pressures your nerves can bear, the better decision you will be able to make. So if you're confident enough that, this is something really, really difficult, if I do not know the answer to this, then, nobody would know the answer to this. With that confidence, I think if you're sitting in the exam hall, then you have to take the decision there. However, having said that, there is some standard there, which I think is, somewhere 50 to 70% of the paper, if you attempt, if you are able to score, let's say out of 35 GK questions, if you're able to take your score 20 plus, then I think that is a reasonable score. If you can take it above 25, that is a good score. And this I'm saying, keeping in mind that the level of the exam is moderate. It is neither too easy nor too difficult. So I think 20 to 25 score is a reasonable score, and 25 plus is a respectable score in GK.
Right, right. Very rightly said, sir. Okay, now my last question to you would be, what, according to you, are the tips for time management? Like if I talk about a person who is preparing for CLAT UG, let's say, so he, of course, would be preparing for other, let's say that he has a plan B also, apart from prepare for CLAT exam. Or now that we don't have the board exam pressure, since board exams are conducted in the month of March, and the exam has been conducted in December, so you have a lot of time. But still, what would be your tips for time management? How should one manage his or her time while preparing for the exam?
So I think if one starts preparing, initially equal amount of time should be devoted to all the sections.
Right.
Because let us not only talk about GK here for this particular question, all the sections are important. So initially, focus should be given to all the subjects. But then, as you earlier said, that everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. So when you devote equal time to all the subjects, soon you get to realize your strong areas and your weak areas. Thereafter, there has to be a recalibration. There has to be a rationalization of the time allotted. So the sections, now this is a human tendency that when we are good at something, we tend to do more of it. So if I am really good at GK, I feel really happy while reading newspaper. But if you ask me that you just solve these maths questions for the next 1 hour, then I'll be like really depressed. But that is something that one needs to get over. So once you realize your strengths and your weaknesses, start giving a bit more attention towards your weaknesses and a little less attention on your strengths, because ultimately you do not have to get an award for scoring really high marks in one section but failing the exam. That is not something that you're vouching for, right? What you're trying to get is a reasonable score in all the sections, and the ultimate goal is selection to get into the institute. So with that thing in mind, you should work on your weak areas, and you should, take a step back from your areas of strength. Not to totally abandon those, but take a step back to devote that extra time to the areas of weakness. And I think I would not like to put any number of hours here. That I think is, varies person to person. But I think if you do not want to go into the hours, then you can have a weekly plan, which is something really workoutable, and it does not give you undue pressure. So let's say at the beginning of the week, you tell yourself that in this particular week, I'm going to accomplish this much in all the subjects. So even if on one day you are not able to do that, you still have 6 more days to go. So a weekly plan is something that is doable, but this plan is really customized. So it depends upon which sections are your strengths and which sections are your weaknesses.
All right, so let me just have a quick glance at the comments that we have. There are a couple of questions in the comment box. Let me go through them. I think we have answered majority of them. Sir, as there are so many names of persons mentioned in different news, so how to remember those names or important dates, as after some time I'm not able to recall those names or dates. So I think yeah, please.
Yeah, of course. I think I have answered this question. So repetition, I think in current affairs, you hear a lot of new names, right? So repetition takes care of that. Like the new president is Draupadi Murmu. Now, she is not someone whose name even I have heard. I've been reading newspaper for over a decade now. I haven't heard her name ever, because she's like out of the, out of the she's not, a very famous person. So she has been picked and suddenly she has become the president. Now, how do I remember her name? Because since she has become the president, her name has repeated like over 50 times in the newspapers. Every time a new appointment is made, every time something happens, President Draupadi Murmu, President Draupadi Murmu. So repetition automatically happens. So you go for repetition, number one. Number two, you go for audio visuals. Like if you have a pictographic memory of something, that is really, really strong. So try to see the picture of that person. Like if you have subscribed to our YouTube channel of HitBullsEye, there is a video we do every week of weekly current affairs. And in that video, I make sure that every person who is in news, there is a picture of that on the same slide. So that pictographic memory plays a great role. So I think these one or two things might help.
Okay, next we have, sir, how newspapers should be read, and should we read the entire news or just some important news?
Newspaper, how it is to be read. I think the entire newspaper need not be read. There are just 3 or 4 pages that you can read and you can leave the rest of the newspaper. Of course, you have to read the explained page, even if it is the Indian Express or even if it is the Hindu. So the explained articles you have to read, the editorials you have to read, the world page and the economy page. I think these 4 pages, if you can read every day, then that would suffice.
Okay. Next is, sir, how can we prepare notes for current affairs?
When making notes, try to be as crisp as possible. Just do not use any grammar at all. Do not write Draupadi Murmu has been elected as the 15th president of India. Just write new president Draupadi Murmu 15th. That's it. So try to shorten it as much as possible. And I would personally suggest you that it varies person to person. I don't think a lot of time should be spent making notes of current affairs when we have good compilations available. On HitBullsEye also, we provide weekly compilations. So I don't think that you should spend a lot of time making notes.
Right. Okay. Okay. Right. So due to new words, my most time goes in searching for these meanings. So in 2 hours, I'm able to complete only 2 to 3 news.
Yes. Okay. I think it's all right if you're starting this slow. It is totally all right. I'll tell you a small fact here. I have been a Hindi medium student till my 10th standard. I've studied all these history, geography, and all in Hindi medium. So when I started reading English newspaper in 11th standard, I used to read the newspaper for 4 or 5 hours every day, and I used to make a vocab diary and all. But this process keeps getting easier, and it keeps taking lesser and lesser amount of time with every successive attempt. So let's say on one particular day you cover 3 news in 2 hours. Do that really, really well. Next day it will take, let's say, 1 hour and 50 minutes. Next day, 1 hour and 40 minutes. This time will keep getting shorter and your coverage of news will keep getting better and better. This is again, I told you, this requires a bit of patience, but of course you will get better. Focus on quality and not on quantity.
Right. Okay. Next we have, it seems like HSEE has been scrapped off. Is it true?
Yes. This Humanities and Social Sciences entrance exam was an exam that was conducted by IIT Madras for this 5-year integrated program. But 2022 was the year when it was conducted for the last time. On 31st of July, this exam was conducted. And from next year, this exam has been scrapped off. So yes, that's a true news. And it has been confirmed by IIT Madras itself.
Right. So I think that's pretty much it. Right. So I hope we were able to answer all of your questions. If still you have any further questions, please feel free to put them up in the Telegram group that we have, and sir will be more than happy, and so will be other people there to answer your questions. Right. So, sir, thank you so much for giving your precious time, and I hope we were able to help out students out there who are preparing for CLAT this year. Right. And thank you so much for being with us. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks a lot.